We're going to dive into the story of a man born a slave, whose voice, get this, was destined to become one of the most heard in all of human history. This is the absolutely incredible story of Bilal ibn Rabah. 1. Just 2 words. But these weren't just any words. This was a cry of defiance. Whispered through cracked lips by a man who was literally being crushed under a massive boulder in the desert sun. It was a declaration of faith that was going to cost him everything, but in the end, it gave him a legacy that would echo for eternity. So how in the world does that happen, right? How did a slave being crushed by a rock make this phrase one of the most heard on the entire planet? That's the unbelievable journey we're going to trace in this explainer. Okay, so to really get Bilal's story, we have to rewind way back, even before he was born. Because here's the shocking part. He wasn't descended from a long line of slaves. No, his ancestors were kings. I mean, talk about a dramatic turn of fate. His mother, she was an Abyssinian princess. We're talking Ethiopian royalty, from a powerful family. But in the chaos of war, she was captured. And just like that, a princess was sold into slavery, ending up as the property of one of Mecca's most ruthless leaders, a man named Umayyah ibn Khalaf. So how did this happen? Well, it all goes back to a famous invasion of Mecca. They call it the Year of the Elephant. After the battle, Bilal's mother was captured and sold off. And back then, the law was just brutal. When she gave birth to Bilal, he automatically inherited her status. So, despite having royal blood, he was born a slave. That was just his reality. All right, so let's fast forward a bit. Bilal is growing up, serving his master in Mecca, and then something starts to change. A new voice begins to be heard in the city, a message that was about to shake up their whole society, right down to its foundations. And this message, it was absolutely revolutionary. First, it said there's only one God, not all these idols the Meccan elite were profiting from. But even bigger than that, it said that all people were equal. It didn't matter what your race was, how rich you were, what tribe you came from. Now you can imagine for a guy like Bilal's master, Umayyah, this wasn't just some crazy new idea. It was a direct threat to his power, his wealth, his entire way of life. And how does Bilal first hear about this? In a pretty wild way, actually. While he's serving his master, he's hearing Umayyah and his powerful friends just mocking the Prophet Muhammad, laughing about his message. But here's the thing. While they're making fun of it, Bilal is actually listening. And in their mockery of ideas like equality and justice, he hears something that speaks directly to his own suffering. Well, as you can probably guess, a secret like that doesn't stay secret for long. When his master found out, he was furious. Totally humiliated that his own slave, his property, had dared to defy him. And so, he unleashed this horrific campaign of torture, all designed to do one thing: break Bilal's faith. First, it was the lash. Umayyah tried to literally whip this new belief right out of him. But Bilal wouldn't break. So when that didn't work, the torture got even worse. They forced him into steel armor and just left him to bake under the scorching desert sun. We're talking 50 degrees Celsius, with the metal just searing his skin. And still, he refused to give up his faith. Then, for public humiliation, Umayyah would hand him over to the kids in the street, who'd tie him up and drag him through the city. But his spirit just would not break. And that led to the final, most agonizing torture. They pinned him to the burning hot sand and then placed this massive boulder on his chest, slowly crushing the life out of him, demanding he renounce his God. And what was his response through all of that pain? It was always the same 2 words: one. A quiet but totally unshakable declaration that there is only one God. And this just made his torturer even more furious. He'd pile on more rocks, but Bilal's answer, it never, ever changed. So this brutal spectacle was happening right out in public, and one of the Prophet's closest companions, Abu Bakr, saw it. He just couldn't stand by and watch it happen, so he went up to Umayyah and offered to buy Bilal. Now Umayyah, seeing a chance to make some money, named this ridiculously high price. But Abu Bakr, he paid it without even hesitating. As they sealed the deal, Umayyah sneered at him, saying something like, "I would have sold him to you for next to nothing." And Abu Bakr's reply was just legendary. He said, "And I would have bought him if you'd asked for 100 times more." And just like that, Bilal was a free man. But this wasn't just the end of his suffering. No, this was the beginning of his true purpose. The man whose voice was once silenced by pure, brute force was about to become the voice for a global faith. You have to understand what a huge deal this was. His freedom represented this massive shift in society. The old Meccan system was all about where you came from, the color of your skin, how much money you had. But this new community, Islam, it threw all of that out the window. It said the only thing that makes you better than someone else is your character, your piety. And Bilal, the black former slave, he became the living, breathing proof of that revolutionary idea. So as the early Muslim community got established, they needed a way to call everyone to prayer. They talked about using bells or maybe fires. Then, one of the companions had this incredible dream where he was taught the exact words for the call to prayer, the adhan. The Prophet Muhammad confirmed it was from God, and then he had to pick someone to deliver it. Who did he choose? He turned and said, "Teach these words to Bilal because he has the most beautiful and powerful voice among all of you." And just like that, the former slave became the very first muezzin. And Bilal's story was far from over. His life after being freed was just filled with honors that would have been completely unthinkable for a slave just a few years before. He was building a legacy that would end up inspiring people all over the world. I think maybe the most powerful moment of his entire life came years later. The Muslims returned to Mecca, the very city they've been kicked out of. And what's one of the first things the Prophet does? He tells Bilal to climb to the top of the Kaaba, the holiest site in the entire city, and give the call to prayer. Just imagine that. Below him stood the same men who used to own him, who tortured him, and now they were all forced to stand and listen as his voice, the voice of faith, echoed across their city. His whole world had been turned upside down in the best way possible. I mean, think about this list of honors. He gave the first call to prayer in Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. He became the Prophet's personal secretary, a position of huge trust. He was even made a high-ranking intelligence officer for the caliphate. And he married into one of the wealthiest, most respected families around. It was a total reversal of the life that society had planned for him. Okay, check out this number, $500 billion. That's the estimated net worth in today's money of Mansa Musa. He was the African emperor of Mali and is pretty much considered the richest person to have ever lived, period. But here's what's absolutely wild. This guy, Mansa Musa, a man with more wealth than we can even imagine, his greatest source of pride wasn't his gold. It was that he could claim he was a descendant of Bilal. The richest man in history wanted everyone to know he came from the line of a former slave from Mecca. I mean, that's a legacy. And that really brings us to the big question at the end of all this. Bilal's life is this incredible journey from the lowest depths of oppression to the absolute highest peaks of honor. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What does it take for just one voice, a voice that was once beaten into silence, to find the strength to not only break its chains, but to echo for an eternity?